Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to All Things Division 3 Soccer with Simple Coach and Jackie. I'm Simple Coach. And that there is Jackie getting old, looking to settle down, get some sleep. Anyhow, I was gonna do a episode of Injured Time today, just because there's so much of the international soccer going on. The Olympics kicked off today with a fantastic 3-0 loss by the U.S. To France. And I've been thinking about a lot of things around U.S. soccer. And again, I just think it's what's in the news and hiring of a new coach and what does that mean and all those things. And I've sort of, my previous Injured Time, I talked a little bit about, the coach and what I think needs to be done. But then I started to think about things like, what are the things that I think U.S. soccer needs to do going forward? And I figured out some things, and so I was just going to run through those. This was really, I was kind of inspired. Oh, she fell. So I was inspired when I played pickup soccer on Sunday morning with a bunch of guys who, like me, are probably much better in their minds than actually on the field anymore. And um, I excluding myself, to be quite honest, because to all the coaches who are trying to call me to get me to show up to preseason, I'm still eligible. Um, but after the game on the ride home, I was thinking a little bit about what it meant to hire Greg Berhalter and his replacement and all that. And like I said, I think I talked a little bit about that. Um, but it made me realize, like, usually hiring a coach could be an opportunity, and I'm not sure this time around. I think it's a necessity, and so not much of an opportunity. And I think it would be a band-aid on what I think is a festering gangrenous flesh wound that U.S. soccer is afflicted with. And you know, all right, maybe not gangrenous, but definitely it's festering. And so, my first thoughts was, as I mentioned, it's not just about a new coach, right? And I think we would it would behooves us to not think of it that way, right? Like that last my last episode of Injured Time, when I said, "What now for U.S. soccer?" I said that the only pressing issue for the federation is to hire a coach to get the team ready for 2026, to get them to compete, to get them have them inspired and inspiring. And outside of that, nothing else matters for that coach. And I think from a coaching perspective, I think the work really should begin after the World Cup. So we only have 18, 16 months, something like that, before that kicks off. So but I started to think of the things that I think of what I think U.S. soccer should embrace, which probably means they won't. I mean, they obviously don't listen to me, but I'm a bit of a pragmatist. And so I'm not like like a lot of other folks and other YouTube guys and including some USSF possible presidential candidates that think you need to tear everything apart and then rebuild something new, right? That's not realistic, nor is it. I mean, it's a little bit fantasy. Like, that would be great, but it doesn't rarely happens that way. But I also think it would be a lot of bit destructive. And so I wanted to think of things that I thought we could actually do and achieve. So, um, and push soccer forward, right? Like, I think that's everyone's objective. And it's, I chose that term on purpose because, the Federation just launched this Soccer Forward Foundation. It's intended to grow the game, and I thought it would be a good time to pivot away. This is a perfect segue to pivot away from finding a coach, focus a little bit of attention on what that means. And so, unfortunately, none of these are quick fixes, right? Nothing. I think everybody wants to snap their fingers and us to be this great soccer nation competing at, making it to to the World Cup finals, that sort of thing. And I just think it's terribly unrealistic. And we are neither prepared nor do we have the talent, nor do we have the acumen or the intelligence, the soccer intelligence yet to compete at that level. Not to say that we can't have a successful 2026, but I think we have to be realistic about our chances of what that looks like. Um, so like I said, there's no quick fixes, but on the bright side, being a history guy and a reader, um, there was no quick fix to Germany that for Germany when they to win the 2014 World Cup. And if you haven't read the famous book Das Reboot, I strongly suggest you do. It maybe provides a little bit of a roadmap ish for U.S. soccer. And I would say the other one, because I'm a lot more t- entwined with Spanish soccer, there was no quick fix for Spain to win its first World Cup in 2010. And the fruits of what we're seeing now from Luis Aragonés was 2006, so probably early 2000s to now. It's a lot of that is fruit of what they started very years ago. So I think the first one, and I've talked a little bit about this, and I'll bang on this drum all day. Shout out to Todd Rundgren. Is I think one of the issues that we have is that the relative lack of organizational power that the state federations have. Each state, individual state federations. I think there are many U.S. soccer federations, and I don't think they exercise their influence over the game as much as they could. So, and what you end up having is a free-for-all, I think, a little bit of what you see now. So teams aligning themselves with leagues and that sort of thing. And there's no sort of cohesive structure that might make some organizational sense just purely from a soccer standpoint. So, and this is where I think the state associations should make the calls on competition in their particular state. And I would go a step further because a lot of this stuff requires little bits of concession from people, right? I also think the MLS academies, their amateur players should participate in state-centered leagues. So, being in New Jersey, there should be a single soccer structure that allows for teams to compete locally. Get rid of all the traveling across state lines unless it's necessary because of number of teams in a region, that sort of thing. But by and large, everyone should play and compete within their same state. And when I say U.S. soccer, just for the record, because I know sometimes I don't clarify, this includes the women's side as well. So the NWSL has a growing academy system. She fell. The NWSL has a growing academy system, and they should be included in this structure. So if, the New York Red Bull Academy should compete in New Jersey against teams that may or may not be up to their level. And it's just because of the geography. And I think there's a number of reasons for this. I will say I'm heartened that this might not be so crazy, right? Just last week, U.S. Club Soccer and the Virginia Youth Soccer Associations announced plans for a unified state cup, right? So I think it's 3 leagues converge into a single state cup. Everyone participates. I think that is just awesome. And I think that should be replicated state in and state out. And I think that, again, probably more importantly, I think the leagues you should never cross a state border, excluding, again, regional reasons for it, to compete. Unless you're going to a tournament. You can still participate in those showcase tournaments and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to get rid of those, fortunately, but you're not going to have to travel 4 hours for a game, at least here in New Jersey, right? And I would throw this in, in a nod to all my good buddies on the Pro Rel for USA people, I dare I would suggest that if you did it this way at the state level, this is where you start implementing promotion and relegation. So you create a single league. You can regionalize it however you want to do it. You come up with 50 ways to do it, but that there is a promotion and relegation from one level to the next or from down a level. And you naturally come up with a competitive structure where the best teams will float to the top over time. So you would have, let's say, a Red Bull at the top division playing against the Cedar Stars Academy and PDA and whoever else, the best teams in the state, right? And you restore some sanity to the youth game. I think that's probably the reason why I think this way, and maybe even remove some cost out of it, right? Like some travel cost and all that kind of stuff. So now, I will say that's not an easy thing to do, right? It's fraught with challenges. State associations would have to work with independent leagues to come up with this model where there is this single structure, and the leagues could easily say no, so they have to be prepared for that possibility. So, but moving on, the next thing I said again, and some of this is, hey, let's return to some normalcy and let kids just sort of play. Right? I've been a big proponent. I've been talking about it for years. I participate in it as a volunteer coach. There should be a return to playing high school soccer, men's and women's. And I would say U.S. soccer, again, this is where we're gonna have to work with MLS, should suspend competitive activities during the high school season. Give amateur players the option to try out for their school. It's not about the level, high or low, quality of play, good or bad, or the coaching, whether they're capability or not. It's everything to do with players understanding things like pressure of competing every day and being accountable to, representing their school and things that have a little bit more depth of meaning than the latest elite super excellent FC club that they may be a part of. So, outside of college soccer, again, my theory, outside of college soccer, high school soccer might be the only other place where players will experience sort of the intangible pressures of the game outside of the professional environment. And I would say, again, I want people to play. So if for some reason they don't make the school team, which again, you would have this theoretically, right? Everybody can play soccer. You'd have a flood of players coming in and you're just not at that level because it's suddenly risen. You can return to your club for training, but there should be no competitive games allowed. There, I said it. When Jurgen Klinsmann was hired back in 2011 and he was interviewed at some point in Soccer America, I can't remember where. He's critical of the American system and how it was used. He called it an upside down pyramid, described it as some convoluted system, and he started talking about meaningful games, and players need to play meaningful games. That was right at the time when the academy system started to develop, and suddenly we got all focused in on playing meaningful games. And yeah, I don't find club soccer to be meaningful. The games are games, right? Anyhow, but here still, we've done this for 15 years and look where we are. We're still here, still talking about the same things. We've seen, I'll just say, a negligible improvement in our players, but the rest of the world has grown. Those players have improved as well. So we've been running real fast in place. And so I just say maybe it's time we have to start considering doing things differently. So, how do you do that? Well, you got to identify future professionals. And how do you do that? And again, to me, this is about kids playing and giving as many opportunities to play in very different environments. And so, this is maybe a technical point, but I think clubs in Major League Soccer and NWSL, they need to get rid of territorial rights altogether. They should not be allowed. Um, I think, right, because NWSL has what they call the Discover list, and MLS has the homegrown territory, right? So if if LA identifies a player in New Jersey, they just can't come and sign that player because Red Bull has dibs on it because it's in their territory. And so I just think that should be done away with. I think we should make clubs be good at finding and recruiting players, and it's a lazy way to find those players. And it also gives players opportunities to sort of shop themselves around a little bit, right? And I think that's a healthy, good thing. And again, I think this is any territorial rights should be invalidated and discontinued, and U.S. soccer should put its foot down. They probably won't because they don't listen to me. And I'm not sure they have much of a foot to put down or the desire to put down a foot, whatever. But, right, this would be a step forward, again, in loosening the reins on players and kids to play and having the ability to sort of, I'll just say, concentrate more on what makes the game great rather than all the structure and machinations around soccer. So, which reminded me, right? And I mentioned the German national team, the book Das Reboot. Maybe we need a Das Reboot of Project 2010, right? So, for those of you who don't know, back in 1998, U.S. Soccer, Sunil Gulati, I think, was part of that. There's a working group that came out with Project 2010. It was with Carlos Queiroz, and it was this 150-page analysis and a series of recommendations to get the U.S. men's national team to contend with a World Cup title in 2010. That was so 1998. What do we got to do to compete in 2010? And so Project 2010 had two critical programs. Generation Adidas. It was called Project 40 back in the day. Now it's called Generation Adidas, where these younger players are given opportunities to sign professional contracts, and yeah, and then there was it was a blueprint and a very heavy investment was the U17 residency camp in Bradenton, right? The IMG Academy. Generation Adidas continues to this day. The residency camp, the way it was structured, it was closed in 2017. It's not a bad thing. It was MLS clubs started to develop their own academies. So U.S. Soccer was like, well, we don't have to do this anymore, so you can go ahead and do that. Now, we didn't exactly compete for a World Cup. We made it to the second round against Ghana. So it wasn't like there was some demonstrable, crazy, excellent thing we had done. But conceptually, I love the idea of a singular purpose of something like Project 2010. Something to rally around, an objective, a unified goal, a unified strategy for soccer around some actionable ideas to improve the national teams. And I do think a new vision is required. I really do. Unfortunately, I do. It's like we're in a dark forest trying to find our way through. And I will say, don't be fooled. I think this encompasses both the men's and the women's program. The men, to me, are, achieving the excellence of mediocrity, and the women's programs, as far as I'm concerned, and Emma Hayes to me is just a band aid, right? Women's soccer is slowly being outpaced by women's programs in other countries, right? And talent, all those things. And so, you know, th- there are some things that I would say are probably philosophical rather than actionable, right? So, actionable would be, oh, we should identify 100 academies to function a certain way and under the purview of U.S. soccer or whatever that is. And then there's the philosophical kinds where we should change our thinking about something and culturally or something, and hopefully over time it takes, right? And so there's something that I think philosophically we have to come to terms with that I think is really important. And that is, we're really good at training individuals. We're really good. We're really good at identifying an individual kid, making the individual kid better. We don't. We don't. I don't think we train teams, right? And I think that's a big shift in sort of how we train, right? And I think there's reasons for that. I'm not saying we're doing it on purpose. I think, right? I think it could be a cultural element of the American ethos, and that's something that it's hard to deal with, right? We're really focused on like the excellence of individual athletes, and I totally get that. But I will say, in the sport of soccer, I think the result is that we suffer a lot from a tactical deficit. And I'd argue technical, but this is philosophical. So a tactical deficit to the rest of the world, or at least the rest of the world that we want to be like, right? So I think there's something that we have to start thinking about around game intelligence and the types of kids that we should look to build up. And, I've always said, one of the things, and I watch club soccer, maybe we should slow the game down, right? Not be so focused on going breakneck speed. Maybe we should slow the game down so that we can allow players who do things differently, better on the ball, but may not have that breakneck speed, and allow that type of game to develop, which we don't allow right now. So, and how do we do that? And I do think there is a way. I do think she's wandering around. Unfortunately, she's got dementia, and so she's really active and spirals around and does all sorts of crazy things. So I apologize. She's a lovely lady, though. So back to it. I think there's a way in which we could do that, and again, this is sort of directionally how do we organize ourselves, and this is actionable. And I'll say this: I think we need to revitalize, reinvigorate, recreate, or redevelop and re-emphasize the Olympic Development Program, right? So, right, Olympic Development Program for the longest time was the thing, right? Like you competed at the club level, you did your thing, and you tried out to be one of the elite players in your state to make the Olympic development team. You sort of played in regional tournaments and whatnot. And right, and that's how you identified the best players in a pool. And so you had this pool of players that were there, right? And so step back, the ODP program, I think this is where we identify or we create a system of play. Maybe we call it Project 2036. I don't know, for the United States suited to our strengths. What is it that we do well? And how do we accentuate some of that and improve on different levels? We develop a game model to maximize who we are as a soccer playing nation. I think my issue, and I might be nuts, which is perfectly acceptable if that's your concern. Um, I think my issue is that we try to solve an issue across the entire country, right? We want to again look at our solutions. We want to implement. I go back to my buddies at Pro Rel for USA. We want to implement promotion and relegation, right? Some places that might work, some places it doesn't work. Some things, right? This doesn't consider the nuance of sort of how it's done. It just wants to be this drop a brick in the middle of a pond and just be like, this is what we're doing. And again, not to get off topic on the pro rel thing, but I think we try to address these things as a country, and we have to accept our geographic enormity and difference. So I think my thing, and I right, what is it so far? Hey, let's work on let's get the league, let's get leagues and teams to play within their state. Let's give the state associations more influence on the game. Let's make an ODP program at a state level, right? Well, I want to develop players locally and regionally, and then using ODP as a mechanism, perhaps on the youth level, identify those players, the best players to play nationally, right? And this is where the structure of ODP, which exists in every state, I think, every state it exists, this is where it becomes, right? So MLS academies are not everywhere. They're not in every state, right? There's a process for tryouts and coaching in every state. That's not the case with MLS academies. And to me, this becomes the best avenue to identify all kinds of players beyond what I think sort of is happening right now. And you know what? And the state ODP teams become regional teams, and sort of you're building these mini pools of players that help. We can help develop them, again, system of play, so they're all sort of playing the same way. And that becomes the player pool for the youth national teams. And why am I not talking about the senior team? Because I think the senior team ultimately is the beneficiary of all this. And I think in this regard, especially with ODP, I don't think it's about reinventing the wheel. I think regardless of how we decide to move forward, the pieces are there to one degree or another, right? And in the past, we found a degree of success. I mean, we went from, right, like if you think about it, 1990, where we just made it to Italy, to 94, to 98, right, to 02, 06 to 2010, like we sort of came from nothing to develop out this national team program to, I think, plateau as to where we're at, and again for the last 10 or 15 years. So it's all there. It's just a matter of how do we reuse it and organize it in a way that makes it a little bit better. Don't get me wrong, I do think there's other things that need to be done that not only tie into ODP. I think if we're going to do this, put this effort in, I think MLS, to a lesser extent NWSL, need to require, their rosters or their, starting 11s ideally, have a minimum number of eligible national team players on the field at any given time. All right, I just think that's something we don't talk about, but I think it's something that we need to start thinking about. Now I get what MLS is trying to do, but it's coming, in my opinion, it's coming at the expense of possible U.S. nationals. So, and I would just add, right, the idea of folding in, MLS and NWSL academies into state-centric leagues, revitalizing high school soccer, I think, again, it's all we're doing is cultivating a richer development environment for future generations of players at the local level, Uh, I think a positive corollary to this is that it returns some sanity to the youth game, from a cost perspective and just management. I think if you abandon the territorial rights and the discoverer lists and refocus on a development strategy, that can take the soccer community and soccer and sort of march us in a little bit more of a singular direction, I think that just ultimately will make the national team stronger. And unfortunately, I think these are the things that, they're not quick fixes, but I think they're crucial steps if we want to revitalize U.S. soccer and sort of where we're at. And then maybe when we have these scenarios where we have to appoint a national team coach, that it's a little bit more meaningful, and we can be a little bit more excited about what should happen. Because until then, I just think, like I said, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a festering wound. So, all right, so I rambled, but I really wanted to get this off my chest. I feel better. Hope you liked it. Feel free to comment down below if I'm nuts. No, I have no problems with that. Or just shoot me an email. I love these conversations. So I definitely think it's something that we need to talk about. How do we sort of take this ship and right it a little bit? So, all right. Hope you enjoy, and we will talk soon. Right, lady? Jackie says goodbye as she spins around in a circle. Okay, talk soon.